Hello and welcome to Living Spark, a project of the Spark of Humanity Network. I'm your host, Danielle, and we will be joined in a moment by Martha Holden, who I'm sure you can already see on your screens. I'm going to do what I usually do, which is to read a little bit of our statement of principle. That's my term because I spent a lot of years in the corporate world, and I'm sure that's what we would have said there. But yes, this is our kind of our this is our mojo. Uh, we begin with the insight that there is a spark of humanity in everyone is the foundation of the Spark of Humanity network. We have discovered that as we connect with and affirm that spark in others, we are claiming our spark, our humanity, and becoming agents of transformation. I could go on, and I usually do read a little bit more of that. What I do want to remind you is that I tend to use a format where I review what I give myself as homework in the previous session. And then I talk a little bit more about that and then move on to the topic of the week and use that as a launch to give myself new homework. I'm not going to do that this week. We talked about compassion. I had the title on the session is Compassion Part 1, and I expect there will be about 73 of these, although not necessarily in order, but Compassion Part 1. And I gave myself, as I recall, a sort of vague assignment of looking for opportunities to grow and practice my own inner compassion. Martha's here to talk about the Spark of Humanity network in relation to the regrettable, the terrible circumstances that we honor today, the 9/11 attacks on New York City, and to talk about that in relation to the topic of compassion. So, Martha, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you move us along with this discussion?
Thank you, Danielle. It's always an honor to be here with you, with all the people here. The idea that there's a spark of humanity in everyone and that it cannot be extinguished, it cannot be contorted, it cannot be polluted, it can be defended, and generally is. It can be baffled, generally is, because we lose track of the fact that our spark cannot be distorted or extinguished. So we feel we have to defend it, and that comes from our bafflement. And then we develop distortions in trying to protect our spark. And all this creates problems. And we do this individually. Considering this is a spark response to 9/11, which means this is just my personal sort of gathering the pieces for potentially like maybe a quilt that might be a whole idea of response. But this is just my personal, how the pieces are fitting together as I think about, okay, in terms of the Spark of Humanity, the purpose, the principle of the Spark of Humanity network, how do I look at and consider the events of 9/11 24 years ago today? And this is not because you should do it this way, but in case you feel that it might be a useful spiritual practice for you to look at doing that. How do you understand this in terms of the principle that there is a spark of humanity in each one of us? So where I'm starting is because I believe in symmetry across scale, so that not perfect symmetry, but it's like holograms, that what is true on the celestial level is true on the human level, is true on the microscopic level, more or less, close enough. So one of my favorite theologians of the 20th century was Walter Wink, who did a lot of good stuff. And he was looking at the conversation about the powers in the New Testament and angels and what are they talking about. And he developed the insight that in every institution, like Orca Media that's putting on the show, like your local grocery store, like Al Qaeda, like the Muslim nation, like the United States. There is, to segue into the language I'd use, is there's a spark of divinity. Each institution has a divine vocation. As that institution turns its back on its divine vocation, it becomes demonic. However you want to understand demonic. But it's getting off track and heading for someplace none of us wants to be. And to be able to recognize that state and that tendency in the institutions with which we are associated, I find empowering, because he thinks of he calls them angels. Every institution has an angel. It has an outward material manifestation, as we do here at Orca in the studio, and it has an interior spiritual reality. And so that's what he's calling the angel. And that spiritual reality of the institution, I would say, just to use the spark language that we've developed, understanding, has a spark of divinity. And the same dynamic would pertain. So an institution can become baffled. The angel of the institution becomes baffled. We'll just say the institution becomes baffled. It starts getting a little distorted in trying to deal with its bafflement. The distortions are painful, so it develops defenses. And the way in our video and the booklet, the defenses are, here's your spark, let's say, and there's one box around the spark, which is the inner layer, which is denial. And then there's the outer box of defense. So there's the inner defense against our own awareness, our own availability to consider. We don't want to recognize it because we feel we have no choice. Because in order to survive, we need to be behaving this way. We know it's not true to ourselves, to our spark, to our divine vocation, but in order to be able to function, we need to behave in this way from the distortions. So we've got this denial, and then we build outer defenses to get people to stay away so we don't become aware of our pain.
Martha, if I may,
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject.
Sure.
I've been fortunate enough, it was a fairly random thing, but I discovered a book over the last couple of weeks called Radical Compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is written by Tara Brach, and she has a very wonderful YouTube channel where she talks about this a lot and has guided meditations on there. But as briefly as possible, because I don't want to keep interrupting you, but you're talking about defenses and institutions. She tells a story which may be apocryphal, may be true, of a temple where a Buddhist temple, where there was a huge stone or clay Buddha that they had honored for generations, for centuries. And that for some reason, the leader of the nation, I think, wanted to build something else there. And they sent someone to move it. And when they were lifting this giant, massive clay Buddha, something slipped and they saw a crack. So they lowered it back down and they started looking, and there was a light in there. There was a glint of something. And so they ran and got crowbars or whatever and dismantled it, only to discover that hundreds of years earlier, their predecessors were at risk of being invaded, and they had encased their golden Buddha statue in a thick layer of clay. And that here was, I want to just use that story to amplify your message about distortions and defenses,
Mm-hmm.
so on, and what may lie beneath
Right.
our defenses.
That's a perfect parable. That is
Yeah.
absolutely perfect. Yeah, and so I mean, we can see it individually, personally, and Danielle's been doing that with you all year. And but we can also see it institutionally and governmentally. Like this country, I'm a member of a spiritual fellowship that apparently was having a meeting on the the first trade tower. I've heard, this may be an urban myth, that they were having a meeting at the time that the first plane hit. I could feel their intentions as they made their translation from the physical into the wherever you go from here. One of the precepts of that, or suggestions of that fellowship, is that when you're hurt, when somebody attacks you, when something happens that you don't like, that you tend to get a resentment over, look at your part in it. What have you done? How has your behavior been that might have caused this to happen? So when we look at, I'm not really talking about compassion directly, but I think that being able to get a sense of motivations and responses is, I may not be using the word, but it's to be able to recognize connect with other people.
No. I've been I've been doing a lot of reading recently. There's been a lot to agitate me in the public arena, right. And I've been spending a lot of time with various spiritual guides. And one of the words that came into my head was equanimity, and the immense power for ourselves, at least for an individual, to begin to look at the rest of the people around us, and if not be able to perceive yet, to imagine, maybe fantasize that one is equal to that other person. One shares equanimity. I'm reminded that immediately after 9/11, a lot of us liberals, sorry, I'm outing myself as if anyone doubted that, ran out and bought a copy of the Quran. And many read it, and many others just set it on the bookshelf. I think that was a genuine gesture on the part of many to understand, to embody equanimity. You are your perspective is equal with mine. I also think that a lot of people who look at only the outside of things were perhaps justified in I remember hearing someone say that it was as if a conflagration was engulfing a house, and someone grabbed a bucket of water and ran over and tossed it on there. It was they were saying too little, too late. But I think that every opportunity we take to seek equanimity with others, to imagine ourselves to the perspective of the other is as valid as mine, or at least it has much to teach me.
Right. Yeah, then there's the compassion, right?
Yeah.
So the United States, when this country was founded, the alleged fount of democracy here, it was property owning European men. And it was what they came up with as their idea of what would work. And there was a battle. My chiropractor has been reading history books and telling me about them. There's a big battle about, do we really mean democracy? No, we really don't. We really want to protect ourselves and have a country, a democracy that we feel good about, feel comfortable about. So our roots are, there's a bafflement there to start with at the very foundation of this country. And, how we treated the indigenous people, how we came by this, we all know all that, or if not, we can learn it. But to understand that as the very, not recognized, denied, not taught freely in some of our schools, and so no compassion for the angel of the country, not realizing that it started, but it started out with some birth defects, and that distortion, as it becomes more defended, we keep looking out. That's the enemy out there, not looking at ourselves, not recognizing, not appreciating, not having compassion with those around us in the other countries. Violence is often, it can be seen as an effort to communicate. It's something that people resort to when they feel they have no resources. There's no other option.
Mhm.
And so, you know, hijacking and flying airplanes into tall towers is an attempt to say there's something going on here that I have no other way. You're not listening to me. You're not hearing me. Maybe you'll pay attention to me now. Maybe you'll listen. It seemed to me that there was a period of time, a few days after 9/11, that we had an opportunity to change our course. We did not inevitably have to move into, you know, I can't even remember what we did, but, you know, it involved Iraq and terrorism and all that stuff, and becoming terrorists in order to fight terrorism. So to begin to see that, I see it as part of the Spark, can be approached through the Spark work, and is also, and I think you're right, I think a feather of compassion tossed out there onto the surging wave of sewage in the world is something. And we do what we each can do. That's part of the point of recognizing and affirming and respecting the gift of the Spark in you and in me and others, is that we do what we can do, and we don't judge it, and we just accept this is what we can do. This is my gesture of compassion, and that's what I can do. And that can be contagious, you know, because
It couldn't hurt. It couldn't hurt.
that's
Yeah.
true. And,
Yes.
and as long as it doesn't tip me over into a feeling of self-satisfaction, well, I've got to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't, worst of all, that is, yeah, I am paying attention to what calls me to do, where I see the need and where I can respond and do it.
Yeah.
And be open about it so that other people can be encouraged, or so it can become contagious. Because that's what we need, is a contagion of compassion.
Yeah. 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 Beautiful. Well said. I have been asked by people recently, do you really think you can make a difference by raising your awareness, your compassion? I also was in a strange group situation where the teacher had been talking about compassion, and one of the students, who I had always come to understand was a very advanced student, this is at a Buddhist temple, began to argue very angrily that his anger could serve compassion, that he could see that someone else was being harmed and his anger could intervene. I didn't jump into the conversation, but I began to remember many times where I worked with the chronically mentally ill people, 98% of them wonderful human beings, 98% of the time. And yet a couple of people threatened my life and put me in positions of potentially being a recipient of violence. And I recall that, and I had forgotten about this, but that I was able to, through exerting a calm, not angry and not afraid, a calm atmosphere of I'm missing the word here, but you get what I'm saying. That by
compassion.
Yes, that was able to defuse a potentially violent situation.
Yeah.
I also intervened a couple of times in my life by stepping between an assailant and their victim, and was bizarrely able to effect a cessation of that violence. I still don't know how I did it, but again, that atmosphere of that energy of calm authority, that's the word I was looking for. That was effective. I was able to, in those cases where it won't always work, people will be harmed who step between, people will be will walk away wondering why they ever did such a foolish thing, unfortunately. But somehow the spreading of goodness, of the angels, of compassion, of recognition of another person's equanimity, a sense of equanimity with others, which is another way of saying my spark recognizes theirs. Those are all things that make a difference, usually in a very small way, but they make a difference, and they at least have the strength of not making things any worse.
Yeah, and I think it ripples out. I think it makes a difference. I'm not sure I'd use the word authority because there's just me, because authority sounds like, I have authority to make you, etc. Presence, because there's something, a grounded presence when you step between into a violent situation. It's not that, although I have read of instances where they just say, stop this in the name of whatever they worship. But just that presence because the spark is alive in everyone. And when you step into grounded in your practice, which is why it's a nifty practice to practice, because we get more deeply grounded in it. So we have more presence, we get more, we're further fully, we're all in the Star Trek transporter room, and we're more fully realized, actualized the more we do this. And so the more presence we have, the more power we have, the more impact we have. And it's not cerebral, it's just something visceral, spiritual, I don't know, but I think it's foundational, and there's that potential in every one of us. So spark language is good, is appropriate language to use with it. Because if your spark is strong and relatively undefended and not distorted and less baffled, you can walk into it. Okay, we've got 2.5 minutes, just to let you know, according to this. Yeah.
And my clock says the same, so I think we're in sync. That's great. We'll look at that. No, I'm struck also by how much harm is brought into the world by those just seeking to externalize their apparent their belief that they have a spiritual authority. There's a reason that you cringed when I used that word. I will not go into this too deeply, but right around the time that I had my near-death experience, someone else that I knew had one, not the same, but a similar near miss with what easily could have been a fatal accident. And I recall that I wasn't real sure how to respond to mine, but I heard him say, I believe that God is calling me to action, that I was kept here in order to do things. And I remembered feeling very uncomfortable with that. And it took me a little while to find the language and be able to say, I was kept here because I have so much to learn, so much to teach, so much to learn. And in terms of externalizing, I say this with about a minute left to us. In terms of externalizing, I'm aware that when awful things happen, we do need to respond to them, and we sometimes need to respond. Our nation needs to respond militarily or with some effort to exert some level of control. But there's always room for insight. There is never too much compassion in the world, and it is never wrong for us to seek to visualize equanimity with others. I have spoken here about my discomfort with the bumper sticker I saw many years ago that said something like peace now, or I'd see things that said save the whales, and I would be like, I can't do that. But then when I saw one that said visualize world peace, I decided I can do that. And it has been part of my spark practice long before I knew there was such a thing. So Martha, I really appreciate you joining us. We've got about 6 seconds left. I appreciate your insights, and always you're welcome to be here.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate this opportunity. May our sparks thrive.